Hello, everyone. As always, with the introductions, you know who he is. I'm Elliot Schrage. This is particularly hard to do because I'm not going to be nearly as good, either as entertaining or as enlightening as Stephen Colbert. So we won't be doing those kinds of clips before in the future. I am Vice President of Global Communications and Public Affairs here at Google. I have a couple of announcements as we get started. I know we're pretty full, indeed overflowing here. For those of you who want to have be able to watch all of this and sit down, we have an overflow room in Benghazi downstairs. I don't expect that many of you will be leaving, but I want you to know that that option is available. The other sort of thing that we're going to do a little differently this time is usually I end up asking questions for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then we open this, we have a conversation, and then we open this up to questions from the audience here. I'm pleased to say, or I'm impressed to say, that we've never gotten so many questions on our Dory system for a presidential candidate who has visited Google. So I'm going to devote much more time today to asking some of the questions that we've gotten and also to make time for questions that you might all have. So with that, again, you've introduced and welcomed our guest. Congressman Paul, I'm new to the Congressman Paul presidential campaign bandwagon, so I want to really understand a little bit more about your political philosophy and your background. You described yourself as a constitutionalist. Right. What does that mean?
That means that you have high respect for the Constitution, and it's the only oath that you take when you go into office as a congressman, or even when you serve in the military, or you're sworn in as a president. You swear to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, domestic and foreign. And that contract is very important, and I believe that our Constitution was probably the best ever written as an agreement between the people and the government. And it's imperfect. Nothing is perfect that man creates. But the principle of the rule of law should be sought after. That is that if you have a contract, you should follow it. If you disagree with part of that contract, you should change it in the proper manner. But ignoring it is the worst thing you can do. And that's what we've done. If you take the war issue, we don't declare wars anymore. We go to war under UN resolutions. We go into war for all kinds of ill-advised reasons, and
so
they end
it's not the idea of war that you're
well,
opposed to.
Not entirely, but I'm against the idea of war when it's not called for. But going to war in a unconstitutional manner is very, very detrimental because it undermines the whole system. How can, if I vote for an illegal war, why would I be a good defender of your First Amendment rights or your Second Amendment rights or any part of the Constitution? And we, unfortunately, are delivering to this new generation a system of government where there's very little respect for the Constitution. And, you know, we have the executive branch abusing it constantly. You can't depend on the judicial branch, and you certainly can't depend on the Congress to protect our liberties.
So again, I want to actually go through a bunch of specific examples. So clearly, you voted against the war in Iraq, and had it been a properly authorized resolution of war, I assume based on what you've said, you would not have supported that.
I would not have.
Right.
Matter of fact, when it came up in the IR committee on which I served, I made them vote on it. Mm-hmm. And said if you other members want to go to war, you should do it properly, get the country together behind you, and fight it, win it, and get it over with and get home, if it's indeed a necessary war. But they didn't have that debate, and they just ridiculed that idea, and they said that part of the Constitution was anachronistic, and we don't do it. But here we are today having the debate that we should have had 4 years ago. But they didn't want the debate, and now everybody's scurrying around to cover themselves about why they endorse the war and now why they don't. And they could have avoided it twice if they'd have agreed with me that it was an unnecessary war, our national security was not threatened, or if they just would have resorted to the rule of law, they could have protected themselves. So there's two ways they should have been able to protect themselves, but now the Congress is up there passing all kinds of resolutions pretending that they're bowing to the people's will, and they're actually helpless in doing anything serious about getting us out of Iraq.
Would you have voted also against going to war in Afghanistan, against the Taliban and the bases that Al-Qaeda had there?
Well, we really didn't declare war against Afghanistan. And I would have voted against authority to go into Afghanistan, take it over, and nation build. Besides, that effort was designed for some economic reasons of oil and gas pipelines and things. That's why they had to take over Afghanistan. But I did vote for the authority to go after the Al-Qaeda, believing that targeting the individual in the group that was seemed to be very likely the people who brought about 9/11. I did, but the authority given and the money given was totally abused. We went into nation building. Where's Osama bin Laden? He's in Pakistan. Pakistan is a military dictatorship that we support, and now we subsidize, and they have nuclear weapons. So it makes no sense whatsoever with this ridiculous foreign policy that we have. So no, I would oppose and never intended for the president to misuse that authority. I wanted him to go after. So what happened? We ignored Osama bin Laden and said, oh, let's go to war against Iraq. So those are the kind of irrational policies that I'm trying to fight.
So in the Paul administration, what would be the policy given that we are where we are today in Iraq?
Well, the one thing is the president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president should be reminded, and I would remind myself, you're not the commander-in-chief of the government of the country and all the people. I mean, there's no massive definition that the president has these arbitrary powers just because he's commander-in-chief. But the commander-in-chief of the forces can move the armed forces around. I'd move them around quickly. I'd bring them home.
So immediately,
yes, I'd bring them home as soon as possible and safely, because
safely for the troops, safely for the people who remain in Iraq?
Safely for the troops and for Americans, because my responsibility, I have a moral responsibility to protect Americans, American property, the American rule of law, and the Constitution.
Do you think at this point America or Americans have any moral responsibility for what happens in Iraq?
Yeah, I think the neoconservatives deserve the blame, and they have moral responsibility, but you don't. I don't blame you for their mismanagement of the war, so I can't penalize you. I can do my best, and I actually sincerely believe that we are the motivation for the civil war over there, so I would not be causing more chaos. If there is, it's because we went in. It's not because we're leaving, although there may be a blip upward or downwards. But ultimately, I'm a bit more optimistic than most. Everybody who's predicting these dire things to happen are the ones who said it would be, smooth and easy and paid for, and there'd be no problems whatsoever. But I think Vietnam is an example of what can happen if you follow the advice of the founders and follow the Constitution. Only constitutional wars, don't get involved, and leave. We left under terrible circumstances. I was drafted in '63 and stayed in for 5 years, and it was a terrible, terrible war to be associated with. I didn't have to go to Vietnam, but we left. 60,000 men died, and we left, and all of a sudden we started talking to Vietnam, and we trade with Vietnam. The president of Vietnam comes here, fulfills the predictions and the advice of the founder, said, talk with people, trade with people, engage yourself, travel, but don't get involved in their entangling alliances with them, and don't get involved in their internal affairs. Don't be a nation builder, and don't police the world. The American empire is going to fail. It is in the process of failing, and I just want to get out of that empire building smoothly rather than waiting for a catastrophic event like a bankruptcy of this country. And the dollar's weak. It's weak because we spend huge amounts of money for war and welfare, and it's unsustainable. And I think that's one of the reasons that the younger generation is very attracted to this philosophy, is that they have become aware that the great burdens are falling on the next generation, whether it's the social security system or the abusive government that's coming down that's going to invade our privacy, that we're getting rid of habeas corpus. Young people are realizing this, and they understand the finances. And actually, it has been a great booster to the campaign because of the young people.
I'm sorry. You sort of mentioned the concept of foreign entanglements, sort of George Washington's reference when he was departing his presidency. Clearly, that's part of the constitutionalist philosophy. Your attitude towards doing business with other countries, China, the Middle East. The Paul administration is leave them be, let them get their own houses in order. And what should the tenor of U.S. relationships be in the international?
Well, we should permit it. trade as fast as possible and evenly as possible. I want low tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, and it doesn't tax the wealthy. It taxes the poor person who would like to buy cheap products.
So why were you opposed to NAFTA? Why was the hand so high against
Because
NAFTA?
because it's government management of trade for this special interest. It's not really free trade. There are more requests from our government to NAFTA to raise tariffs. You know, we want protectionism. If you're a big corporation, you might get some protection from that, where free trade is different. In Washington, you have managed international trade under the UN NAFTA type ban or WTO, which is just bigger government, and I don't like that. Or you have the protectionist that says that no, we shouldn't trade, high tariffs, and punish the consumer by making them pay higher prices for their products.
So I have to ask, I've asked other people, other candidates who've come. So for a company like Google going and doing business in China, you think it was a good thing for us to begin operations?
That's right. That's your right under the Constitution, and it's your right in a free society. And it shouldn't even be. Pardon me?
Even if there are restrictions that make people uncomfortable in terms of access.
That's your business. That's your business. But the market, if some group in this country frowns upon it, they have the right to try to punish Google in the market. But they don't have the right to come to me to punish Google and say you can't do it. So your contract is your business, and some contracts aren't as good as others. But what I want to do is protect the right of freedom of contract, which is one of the elements of a free society that's crucial. Its free contract is similar to the free association of two individuals in a social sense, in a sexual sense, in a religious sense. You don't want to interfere. So in the economic sense, and I apply the same rule to economic voluntarism, that you can come together with any voluntary contract, and the government has a responsibility if one side violates it and there's an argument. I'm still at the point where I don't think you go and shoot each other. I'd still use the courts to settle these disputes.
So immediately the idea of contracts come to mind. So clearly then your position on issues like gay marriage, you'd be supportive of that.
I'm supportive of all voluntary associations, and people can call it whatever they want.
So prostitution, contract, fine?
That would not, I think that's been around a long time, and they haven't been able to stamp that out. I wouldn't be having the prostitution police energized from Washington.
So, but and again, consistent with the libertarian philosophy, what people do on their own time, in their own way, so long as it doesn't hurt other people.
That is the rule.
That's the philosophy.
That is the rule. And of course, we should, and I do, I extend that. That if you can't hurt me and I can't hurt you and I can't take your property and we're supposed to follow the contracts and the agreements we have, the government should do too. And that's where people fall down. You mean the government can't take from one and give to another? And can't they ever interfere with? How often does the government interfere with voluntary contracts? What contract can you do today without government approval? And how can you use your land without government approval? How can you maintain your land without paying your rent to the government? So those things are things I want to work away from. I want private property ownership, and I want voluntary contracts, and I would like to.
Is that at all levels of government or just the federal? So zoning regulations wouldn't be in favor of that?
Well, as a federal level, I couldn't prohibit it. The states can do it. But if you want to argue the case of the market, you can come to Houston. The whole city of Houston was built without zoning laws. But,
Consumer safety legislation?
Not legislation, but there could be consumer groups,